super honored to be able to present data that is not mine. I feel a little bit weird about it, but you know, I'm taking it as a real high honor. So we're going to talk about some email marketing work trends. It's a combination of a survey that Really Good Emails did, and then I supplemented it with some research of my own at Oracle, since kind of mixing the two together. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Chad White. I'm the head of research at Oracle CX Marketing Consulting. We're a global full-service agency of about 500 folks who know everything about digital marketing. And I'm also the author of Email Marketing Rules, which is now in its 3rd edition. Hopefully you've had a chance to pick that up. And I've written more than 3,000 blog posts about email marketing over the years, which is probably too many. And I'm the EEC's 2018 Email Marketer Thought Leader of the Year, which was a huge honor. Anyway, enough of that. So got a couple of surveys. Really Good Emails survey is about people and process. And they're recognizing that there's all sorts of people that are in this industry, and they wanted to capture that. They've done this survey for a few years now, so we have some nice year-over-year data that we can talk about. It's a neutral party, which is great. They don't have any agenda. So the survey data they collected, they could write the questions in such a way as to be sort of tech neutral. And then they wanted to ask some questions that they felt that other people weren't asking. So it's about 1,500 people that took this survey. It took them about 13 minutes to take it. You guys got faster. You got like half the time to take it, which is great. And then the Oracle survey we did was about email marketing trends. We wanted to be able to understand how the trends were affecting email marketers' jobs. We wanted to give you some perspective on what we feel like you should be prioritizing, because there's a lot you can do and you can't do it all. And we also wanted to highlight some of the issues that our clients were asking us about, because we get some questions over and over again, and that helps give us focus. So our survey was internally of our more than 500 consultants. We asked them about 26 different email marketing trends. We asked them about what they thought the current adoption rate was in the industry, and about how impactful that particular trend was going to be this year. As all good research is, you put it into quadrants. And so we mapped it according to that adoption rate, whether it was high or low, and then that impact, whether it was high or low. And we've dropped them into these quadrants. And our sort of low adoption, low impact, we have our unproven opportunities. In our low adoption, high impact, we have competitive differentiators. In our high adoption, high impact, we have our proven essentials. And in our high adoption, low impact, we have our established commodities. And so throughout the presentation, I'll be referring to this grid. And you'll see where things kind of lie. And it gives you an idea of, hey, what are we talking about in terms of adoption? What are we talking about in terms of the impact of this trend? Is this something I should be paying attention to? Or is this something I can maybe put off? All right. With all that said, let's get to it. Let's start with the people, all of you. The part-time, full-time breakdown in the industry right now is that we've got a little bit more full-time folks year over year. It's about 12% increase in the number of people that are full-time. I see this as a good trend. It's a trend that indicates that the industry is maturing. It will be confirmed by what we see with team sizes coming up. But I think it's a very good trend. But there's still a lot of you that are definitely doing email sort of part of your job. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are part-time workers. It means that you probably are wearing multiple hats. So part of your time is spent on email. The other part of your time is spent over on web or on social or something else. But in general, there's some good trends here. In terms of the roles that you're playing, about 55% of you are what I like to call multi-threat. You're kind of doing it all. You're wearing all the hats. You've got all the tattoos. So that's a good thing. And again, this aligns with some of the other data that we see later on. And then the rest of you are part of this 45% that are specialists. You're specializing in being an analyst, a developer, a project manager, a designer, and a writer. This is something that we're going to see, I think, much more of going forward. So if you are one of these multi-threat people, you should probably start thinking about, all right, among all the things I'm good at, how could I potentially specialize? Team size, we see about 25% of you are solos, wink, wink. Star Wars reference. About 2 to 3 of you, nearly half of you are in teams of 2 or 3. And then there are the big boys, 4+ size teams. That's roughly about a quarter of you. And we're seeing pretty good growth in team size, which I think is really good because it allows more specialization. Because you can only do so much when you're dividing your time between lots of different disciplines. So definitely good, strong growth here in team size, which I think demonstrates that brands want to go deeper and get more knowledge about particular facets of the job. So in other words, we're going to see small teams continue to require really versatile email marketers that know how to do lots of things decently well. But these larger teams are definitely going to require more specialist roles, and that's something you should be thinking about when you're kind of mapping out your career arc in the industry. Let's talk about remote life. About 53% of you work in offices full-time. A little bit over a third of you have some freedom. Probably means you have the ability to work from home, a day a week, 2 days a week, maybe 3 days a week, which is great. And then 13% of you are like myself, who are fully remote. I've been fully remote for about 14 years, which is amazing and awesome for myself and my family. I hope that more of you get the opportunity to do that. I have a bold prediction that by the end of the year, a lot more of you will be remote or have at least some freedom to work remotely. We are about to embark on a grand experiment in remote working. And I think that a lot of companies will find that the world doesn't stop and that productivity maybe even goes up and that everyone is a bit happier and they are able to take care of their families better. Huzzah! So I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot more flexibility in the future if that's something that you like. I love working remotely, but it's not for everybody. I know people who are people, and they love being around other people, and it gives them strength and energy and propels them through their day. So remote life is not for you, but for those of you who like some flexibility, it can be really wonderful. So I think more of you will be getting that whether you want it or not. So, and this is on top of a drop of 18% year over year of people being office bound. So, all right. In terms of the tenure in the industry among the survey respondents, it roughly breaks down into quartiles. Very few people were very fresh to the industry. About a quarter have been in for a year to 3 years, about a quarter 3 to 5 years, and a quarter 5 to 8 years, and then there were roughly 20-ish% that have been for 8 or more years. Raise your hands. 8+ years in the industry. It's a fair amount. Yeah, nice. On average, about 4.8 years. Fun aside, my wife, I was sharing my slides with her because we've been having lots of slide building discussions. And she was like, well, why is this old person here? And she's a physician, so she's had 3 jobs over her career so far, and doesn't understand that in the tech industry, things shuffle around quite a bit. And I was like, no, I'm keeping the old person, not substituting the baby, which is what she wanted, like a little kid. No, if you've been in the industry for 5 years, you are a certified veteran. You've seen a lot. So, all right. So looking ahead, Really Good Emails wanted to know, how you were feeling about being in the industry. Did you think you were still going to be in the industry? And about 71% said that they still expected to be in an email role in 5 years. And about a little bit less than a third thought that they'd be moving on to something else. And to me, this feels pretty amazing because definitely email is a stepping stone to other parts of the business and to other parts of marketing. If you're in email, you're learning about segmentation, you're learning about CRM, you're learning about personalization, you're learning a lot of great data skills. And I hope that a lot of you, especially the designers who are here, are really leaning into that. That is super valuable skills that you can learn about how to use data to target and to message. And if you have those skills, you can definitely be able to be like sort of, I don't want to say promoted out of email, but you can like rise above and like be able to oversee lots of aspects of marketing, including email, but also social and web and other things. So really super valuable skills. And we're seeing that there was a decrease in the folks who were expected to leave email. So definitely email can be your forever thing, or definitely your long-term thing. And that's great to see. I think we're past the days of people being anxious about whether or not email was still going to be around, all the ridiculous email is dead talk, being driven by a lot of the social media people who have since gone out of business in some cases. So I hope everyone's feeling really secure about email as a field. I don't see any reason to doubt that email is going away anytime soon. That's a whole long conversation, but I can tell you why, but you should feel pretty good about where you're at. So in other words, email marketers are really quite satisfied, which is fantastic to see. But there definitely are some pain points in the industry. I want to talk about those. So among the pain points that Really Good Emails asked about, the number one was organizing assets and people. Here's where we're going to start, folding in some of the research that we did. So there's definitely more assets and more cross-channel coordination that you have to do. It's just sort of a fact of life. There's a few things driving this. So for instance, AI-powered content recommendations. That requires a lot of asset creation, a lot of asset tracking, making sure that all that is working the way that you want it to work. This is one of our low adoption but high impact trends. If you are a retailer, a media company, or a large B2B company, you probably have lots of SKUs, lots of assets, lots of content that you are trying to get in front of the just right people. And so AI is really the absolute best way to do that, but it means that you're shuffling a lot of assets. Personalized landing pages, probably roughly half of your email marketing departments have responsibilities for landing pages. Having a seamless transition from email or social or wherever to a landing page is something that's becoming more and more essential. And definitely, having those personalized where you're tracking that journey and being able to populate that landing page with messages that, again, continue that journey in a nice seamless way is becoming really essential. And again, that means more coordination of assets and more coordination, probably working with your web team who, maybe doesn't care a lot about email, and that can be a struggle. And then sort of the big one is omni-channel orchestration. So landing pages is a small part of the equation, but if you're doing email right, you're probably having conversations with your social media team and your web team, your print marketing team. Like, all these things should be working together in as seamless as a way as you possibly can. And this is a really challenging trend, not only because consumers are super demanding and have really high expectations of us, but because it means that we have to do so much coordinating with other people within our organizations. And I think in the world of email, we know that the tech is hard, the coding is hard, dealing with all the inbox providers is hard, but dealing with lots of other people who have different ideas than we do, that can be really challenging. And so this is the thing we're going to have to get much better at. The number two sort of big pain point is coming up with new ideas. And here's where I'm really letting the secret sauce out, so make sure you take note of this. This is the way to get new ideas. It's this right here, Really Good Emails, a great way to get new ideas. I totally agree with Mike. Actually Matthew was saying like don't steal, but actually I think what you should do is absolutely steal. It's the borrowing you don't want to do. You want to make it your own. You want to steal it hard so that they can't even tell where it came from. But definitely look at what other people are doing and then take those ideas. Take that little bit of code here, a little bit of code here. Take those visual design ideas. Take some messaging. Steal some CTA language. But just take a little bit here, a little bit there, and it's all good. There's no reason to have to come up with new ideas out of nothing. There's inspiration all around us. This is a great place to get it. You should also be having your own personal swipe files where you're saving emails that you get that you think are awesome. Save those maybe put them in a place that your whole team can get to them. Maybe start every one of your weekly meetings or whatever by sharing a few of those emails and talking them through, so everybody's kind of on top of what's going on. All right, big pain point number 3, dynamic content, very challenging for sure. And this leads us to our number 1 most impactful trend out of all 26 trends that we asked about, which was email personalization. Definitely established, but super, super high impact. This is a trend that is what I call a long arc trend. 15 years ago when I got into this business, we were talking about personalization, and it was all about first name mail merges. That's what personalization was 15 years ago. Look how far we've come. It's sort of amazing now to think about what personalization is and how first name mail merge is a joke. You really got to show that you know people on a much deeper level. If you just have a first name mail merge, it doesn't really mean anything if you don't back it up with other personalization that really demonstrates that you know this person, you know what they're interested in, you know and understand their journey that they're on with your brand. This is a long arc trend that we're going to have new tools that are going to come into the system that we're going to be able to leverage and do this even better and better and better in the years ahead. AI is definitely going to be a big part of this. So this is a trend that's going to be running for quite some time. And then the 4th biggest pain point was cutting through opinions. Again, people, right? So this is where it gets tricky. So I want to give you a little bit of help with winning arguments with proof. Hopefully you're doing A/B testing. If you're doing that and you are a high volume sender, you have opportunities to do multivariate testing, which is, again, it's almost sort of crossing over into, like sort of average adoption. But if you have lots of email volume, if you have a lot of subscribers, you can have opportunities to use multivariate testing, which means you're testing more than one variable at a time, which can be really handy if you want to test, a couple of different, hero images with a couple of different CTA language word choices, and you can see what combination works best. It's the combinations that makes multivariate really powerful, and you can't really do that just with straight up A/B testing. Also, advanced performance analytics. We are getting to the point where our analytics game is really stepping up, and we're looking way deeper down the funnel and kind of across funnels to understand what our subscribers and our customers are doing. So these are things like subscriber lifetime value or customer lifetime value, like revenue per email, revenue per subscriber, those kind of metrics which are really deep and have sort of a broader focus. That's what we're leaning more and more into. And those can also help you win arguments if you have that kind of data available to understand if you tweak this part of the journey, what does that do in terms of the ripple effect that it has later on? Because some of these changes may look good just in isolation, but then when you put it in play of everything that's going on in that journey, it could have downstream effects that are negative. All right, so speaking of metrics, Really Good Emails asked you what your most important metrics were. 41% of you said clicks, which made me decently happy. Clicks are definitely a good place to look. I was a little bit sad that 25% of folks were saying that open rates was their number 1. I had to wipe away some tears when I was looking at this data. I would encourage everyone to look deeper down the funnel. I mean, opens are important. It is a way to gauge engagement, but it really is not such a great metric because boosting your opens doesn't always lead to long-term success. You can do open baity subject lines that can boost your open rate temporarily, but you're trading away your brand respect and trust. So you need to be really careful. I always like to look lower, and this is especially true with subject lines. And I think this is where some of this misunderstanding comes from, is that a lot of people still think that subject lines, that the whole point of subject lines is to get opens, and it's not true. When you test your subject lines, your open rate is not your success metric. You need to use metrics that are further down, because the whole point of a subject line is to get the right people to open your email. And you can't tell if you've gotten the right people to open your email unless you're looking at clicks or conversions further down. You don't want to just get anybody to open your email. You want the right people, the people who have an alignment with the message of your email. So always be looking deeper down if you can. So still a lot of focus on engagement across the industry. But we are seeing a little bit of a turn. We're sort of turning the corner a little bit. So for instance, revenue per subscriber, this is a metric that we've seen more and more respondents saying that that's their number one metric. So that is good to see. And the growth of that, the use of that metric paralleled the use of lifetime value, which is also great to see. So definitely some of your peers are getting on the track. It's definitely not easy. Some of you are probably thinking like, well, the point of my program isn't to generate revenue, it's to generate engagement. In that case, I would encourage you to think about revenue proxies. If you are, for instance, a subscription-based company, your email program is probably about retention. It's probably about keeping people engaged and using your platform so they don't cancel. You can probably calculate some type of a proxy about, folks who are X engaged with our email program, they cancel at a much lower rate than people who aren't engaged. You can turn that into a revenue formula, which is good for you to be able to tie your work back to revenue whenever possible. So I would encourage you to think about, are there proxies that you can set up where you can draw some dotted lines to the behavior in your emails, to what that does to revenue for your business, whether it's through retention or through something else. All right. So in other words, we have a lot of pains, but I think that they're mostly, growing pains. We're a growing industry, we're an evolving industry, and change is hard, but I think all these changes are really positive. Let's talk about workflows. Last year, there was an image of a guy twirling like a fiery baton, so we upped it this year, spinning fire hat. So you definitely have more emails in production at once. You are juggling more emails in production, 4.8 on average. Year to year looks a little scary. I don't think that trend is going to continue. It's a 26% year over year increase, which seems a little unsustainable to me. But if you look over the past 2 years, it's only 14%. So maybe not quite so dire. At the same time, it's taking you more time to complete each email. A little over 6 days per email, and that's up about 20% over the past 2 years. So a couple of sort of rather daunting figures where you're juggling more emails at once and it's taking you longer to produce each email. It's definitely a tough place to be. List size is definitely impacting this equation in a big way. If you are at a larger brand where you have lots more subscribers, you saw you already spent a lot of time making your emails, and it got significantly worse over the last year. So folks, if you had over 2 million subscribers on your list, those folks went from 9 days to create an email to 12 days. So pretty significant growth among sort of larger lists. At the lower list size part of the spectrum, we saw that production times didn't really change very much. They were pretty much flat. But at the upper end, things got more difficult, and I will explain why in a second. So there are lots of ways that creating emails has gotten harder over the last couple of years. First, email annotations. This is the new Gmail functionality where you have to code in special code into every single one of your emails to be able to take advantage of special preview text that populates in top deals under certain circumstances, for certain senders, at certain times. Lots of caveats there. We recommend that everybody use this, but the part that we recommend that everybody use is the part that allows you to populate your logo. Everything else we think is sort of a game time decision, depending on your brand. But if you are actually trying to make full use of email annotations, it means you're adding special code to every single one of your emails. That is definitely additional work. Dark mode. Show of hands, the dark mode pains in the room. Yeah, dark mode is a pain in the butt. We've been optimizing a lot of our clients' emails for dark mode. We're optimizing our own Oracle CX Marketing Consulting newsletter for dark mode. And we made a bunch of changes and we were really happy with it. And then Litmus put out Office 365 on Windows 10, which looks like garbage, like totally destroyed our emails because we have background images. So back to the drawing board there. But dark mode is definitely a challenge. I think we made a bunch of changes to our emails. Recommend everybody kind of take a look at that as well, see what you can do without going crazy. Accessibility, which in some cases aligns with dark mode. I know that we definitely increased some of our contrast ratios for dark mode using pure black fonts or pure white fonts, whereas before we were hedging. So having good contrast for folks that maybe have vision problems, or for just normal run-of-the-mill people who are out in bright sunlight with their mobile phones, good contrast, good high contrast is good for everybody. But doing some colorblind tests and stuff, there's additional testing that has to be done to make sure that you're having an experience that works for as many people as possible. And it definitely takes some extra work. Voice assistants, reading emails. This is a sort of a very new thing that probably a bunch of you aren't seriously thinking about. And the challenge is that we've spent years and years and years perfecting visual communication with our emails. And now our emails are being read in some cases, and they sound horrible because we use creative punctuation, creative spacing, creative spelling. We use emojis, which if you check, most emojis have crazy names. So you got to be really careful, and you don't want that to be read out. It doesn't sound good. So here, my sort of like short advice is that people are not going to be just using voice assistants to engage with your emails, because it's impossible to engage with your emails because there's no browser to click through to. So most of your CTAs are garbage and aren't going to help them. So all they're going to do is triage their emails with voice assistants if they're doing anything, in much the same way that people use smartwatches to triage their inbox. They're not using it to engage with your emails. Smartwatch is a great analogy. It has no browser. You cannot click through. You cannot really take action on a smartwatch. Voice assistants are the exact same way. So my advice here is to think really hard about your subject line and your sender name and your preview text, and see if you can get that to be a little bit more voice friendly, because that's the thing they're going to be listening to decide whether or not to delete your email or to hold on to it and look at it later. And then AMP, we could spend a whole session on AMP for sure. But the challenges here are that you have to create a brand new email that sits next to your plain text, your HTML email. You have to learn a brand new coding language. Definitely more time to have this sort of enriched experience inside Gmail. So those are the ways in which your jobs have gotten more difficult. Let's talk about the ways in which your job has gotten a little easier. The first one is AI copywriting tools, which I will admit is a little bit of a mixed bag. Our clients have had mixed experience with it. Sometimes they see lifts that don't last for more than 3 months. That's a bad sign. That's a sign of gamesmanship. That's not what you want. You want lasting lift, meaning that you're generating real, real positive engagement, and not, again, this sort of gamesmanship. But I think long term, this can be a way to get new ideas, think about language that you hadn't thought of. So it can be a plus. So that's the first one, and really that's it. That's the only way in which our jobs have gotten any easier at all. Everything has gotten harder. So it only makes sense that the amount of time we're spending on emails has gotten longer. Really because it's taking us longer to optimize the experience for everyone, because everyone used to be more monolithic, and now we're getting smaller and smaller chunks of our audience that we're having to tailor to. Tailor to those folks in Gmail, tailor to those folks who are using dark mode, tailor to those folks who are using voice assistants to listen to our emails. So our audience is becoming sort of micro audiences or sort of sub audiences that we have to pay attention to. And so if we're trying to create an optimal experience for a vast array of sub audiences, it's going to become more challenging. Unfortunately, I don't think this is going away. Let's talk about some tools. Let's talk about ESPs, the ones that small companies use. Coming in at number 3 is Klaviyo. Number 2, MailChimp. And this is slightly misleading because Number one is everybody else. When I was at Litmus, we did a similar survey about ESP usage, and we allowed people to write in and tell us who they were using. If it wasn't one of the ones, we gave them a chance to select. And along with everyone that they could select, all the major players and all the write-ins, it was over 240 different ESPs that people were using. So there is a lot of choice, particularly at the lower end of the market. So if you are a smaller house, you have a ton of choices, a ton. Probably, let's be honest, too many choices. But there's definitely a lot of choice for you. If you don't like what you are using, you have opportunities to go elsewhere. So for you medium-sized companies, number 3, Adobe. Number 2, MailChimp. And number 1 was Salesforce. And for you large companies, number 3 was Oracle. Number 2, Adobe. And number 1 was Salesforce. In general, people were not super thrilled with their ESPs. On average, 6 out of 10. And I don't believe this question was written in like a net promoter score way. It was like, would you recommend? I think it was like, are you happy? But it's hard to not view it a little bit as an NPS. So not a ton of happiness. And year over year, it didn't change at all. So last year it was 6 out of 10. This year it's 6 out of 10. But I do want to give you a little bit of my perspective on this. So at the high end was Klaviyo at 7.5, which is on an NPS score still neutral. So this sort of says that like nobody's happy. And if nobody's happy, then you kind of got to adjust the scale a little bit. And then the lowest was IBM and Constant Contact. IBM's not surprising since Silverpop got divested and got spun off to a private equity group, which means that probably in a year or two they're going to get sold again. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. Uncertainty makes people unhappy. There's still quite a bit of uncertainty in the industry in terms of like who's going to own what. Things are still kind of like settling out, and definitely there's still quite a bit of like buying and selling going on. Lots of mergers and acquisitions, and that's going to make people a little bit sort of unhappy and uncertain about the future. I think that's part of what's going on. But again, if you look at this, if the lowest is essentially 5 and the highest is 7.5, that is a really tight range. That's really tight. For our part at Oracle, we were exactly average at 6, which I'm pretty happy about because we have a lot of really big clients. And although I didn't look at the data to suss this out, my suspicion is that the larger brands are much harder to please because they have much more at stake. So I think that's probably a fair assumption. So I'm thrilled with 6. So what this means is that this already fragmented ESP landscape is going to become more competitive. There's a lot of competition in our space. And so if you're not exactly thrilled, I think you have to always kind of look at it in comparison to some other thing that you might have that you might also be less than thrilled about. So I think it's a bit of a challenging space. And that leads us in to extra toppings. This is the idea of like supplementing your ESP, and 70% of you are doing that. I think it should be 100%. I mean, all of you should be using either Litmus or Email and Acid. You should at least be doing that. That should get us to 100% right there. But of course, there's all kinds of other opportunities to use other types of services, whether it's analytics or something like Movable Ink or Kick Dynamic or Live Clicker. There are lots and lots of ways that you can supplement your ESP to make it work harder for you. So I sort of reject this idea that your ESP is your be-all, end-all. It should not be the one purchase you make and then you're all done. So I think part of supporting my view is that the largest companies, so these 3 ESPs that the largest companies use, they are the most likely to be supplementing their ESP with something else. So the most sophisticated email marketing platforms are being supplemented at the highest rates. That should tell you that this really should be the status quo. You should be supplementing your ESP with other things that are out there. So 88 for Oracle, that's great. Again, I think it should be 100%. Because there's great stuff out there that isn't currently offered inside ESP. It's inside of any ESP. So make sure you're using that. So ESPs are rarely meeting all of our needs, and you shouldn't expect them to. That's the punchline, I think, is that I think we have slightly unrealistic expectations of what our ESP should be doing for us. They should not be the one thing that we're using. And in other words, you should really be expecting much more email innovation, whether it's coming from your ESP, from some third-party tool, or from inbox providers. Definitely, this is an industry that is not standing still. And in other words, you should expect your jobs to continue to change, and it's time to better level up your skills at a conference really soon and make sure you're on top of all these things. And with that, I thank you. And I don't know how we're doing on time. I don't know if we have time for Q&A.
Did you dig into, in particular, how they're supplementing? Like, obviously, a lot of people are using litmus and deliverability analytics and things like that, but did you get an answer on the specifics, how people are supplementing their ESPs?
Yeah, and here's where I might defer to Mike, but I don't think we asked about exactly how they were supplementing their ESPs. I think it was just a blanket question about whether or not you were supplementing. Yeah. But I think it's things like litmus and email and acid. I think it should be analytics things, and maybe that's a thing in the future that we could clarify a little bit better to make it clear exactly what we consider supplementation. But yeah, there's lots of opportunities. Other questions? Sure.
What are some of the biggest opportunities you're seeing in the ESP space, whether it's consolidation or new tools? I'm thinking on the web front, like Webflow is pretty cool, like taking coding out of it, or people using litmus as an add-on already in the ESP. Do you foresee massive consolidation of these tools?
Yeah, so the question is about opportunities for ESPs to add new functionality and to integrate with tools. A little bit tricky since I work for an ESP, but in general, I'll say that definitely integration is a very, very good thing. So that's definitely a plus. But in terms of opportunities, it seemed like the first part of your question was is there more of an opportunity to make email easier, more of a WYSIWYG experience? That sounds really lovely, and I know at the lower end of the market, that is something that the MailChimps of the world strive to do. At the same time, email annotations and dark mode, everything is sort of pushing in the opposite direction where you need to mess with the code in a very specific way. So I think it'll continue to be that sort of meeting the audience where they're at, right? So smaller companies maybe have that one person who's working on email that may not have a ton of experience. That's a person who really wants the hand-holding that a WYSIWYG is going to give you, and they want it to be sort of as simple as possible. But at the upper end of the market, folks are going to want to take advantage of all the special things that you can do. And an AMP is certainly one of those things right now, where some ESPs have added AMP support in, and other ones have not. That's something that actually to be candid, we're wrestling with at Oracle, because it's no small thing to do. At the same time, we're balancing that against the fact that not very many of our clients are asking for it. So it's a big lift, to satisfy what might be a kind of a small number of people. Yes.
I was kind of, I wouldn't say incredibly shocked at the increase in the amount of workload time that goes into email projects now. But I was curious as to whether or not, in the process of your research, or just in what you do on a day-to-day basis, if you've seen any consistent feedback from the community about what we're doing on automation and taking the process that we do on a daily basis and finding new programmatic ways of approaching the things that we do, other than just the WYSIWYG editor approaches.
Yeah. So the question is, how can we get more efficient? Because it is alarming how much more time it's taking us to do things. So there's definitely opportunities to, for instance, adopt modular build architectures. If you're not doing that, if you're using traditional email templates still, take a look at adopting a modular build architecture, which is essentially sort of taking sort of Lego blocks to make all of your emails, and you sort of pull this block over and this block over, and you build your email that way. We did that for one of our clients really recently, and it cut down their production time by 25%. Which they were thrilled with, which allowed them to do more testing in that particular case. That's how they wanted to reallocate that time. So modular builds can definitely be great. If you're not using partials, that's a wonderful thing to be using. That's like a piece of global code that you put in your emails, and then if you change that code in any way, it changes it across all of your emails that have that code in it. It's a wonderful way to not just update your copyright notices, but also to like do your footers and your headers, things that sort of stay the same from email to email. It's a really wonderful way to make sort of a global change, and that changes it across all of your emails, including all of your triggered emails that you're using it in. So it helps you with that like triggered email management. So there's things like that can help. But yeah, I think a lot of it is sort of on the architecture side, using snippets, using partials, and making that build process like as efficient as possible. But part of it is just that it's kind of messy right now. And again, I don't really foresee that changing in any big way.
And Chad, the way that question was written, it didn't ask in your build. It's just asked how long does it take to complete an email or an email a campaign is what we said. So it actually could be that you're spending more time in the strategy or figuring out your cascades or your flow of multiple emails within that campaign, or doing more segmentation. So the increase in time doesn't necessarily mean it's more time to code. It just means we're giving more thought into what we're sending. That's how I took the data.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think part of it is that it's taking more time to code. There's lots of reasons why it would take you more time to code, but I think all this other stuff is also really important. When I was at Litmus and we were running the survey there, we asked questions about like the review and approval process, and that was one of the most like time-consuming parts of this. And again, as email becomes more omni-channel focused, getting that approval, getting everyone to agree that yes, we're done, is a really challenging thing. So I think that's a big opportunity to kind of like lock down your processes and make sure that you don't have fourth revisions, that you nip it in the bud at like 2 revisions and call it a day. So there's a lot of internal process stuff that I think is also a big opportunity, because again, people is where things we focus a lot on the technology and the coding and all that stuff, but the people is where I think increasingly we're going to have choke points. And so getting your internal processes lined up, making sure that everybody understands what we're trying to do, everyone's rowing in the same direction, I think that's where you can save some incremental time. Yeah, thank you.